Welcome back to the Fan Railer K channel, where I railfan and travel back in time. Today we are going to be discussing the history of the Garden Mitchell Secondary. The Garden Mitchell Secondary is a lightly used freight spur off the Hempstead branch. The original line of tracks for the Garden Mitchell Secondary was built in the 1870s as a part of the Central Railroad of Long Island. The Central Railroad of Long Island, built by Alexander Turney Stewart, was a mix of passenger and freight railroad extending from Flushing through central Long Island all the way to Bethpage and passing through the towns of Floral Park, Garden City, and Plainage and Island Trees. Later on, Stewart decided to extend the line down the South Shore to Babylon. That portion of the railroad would come to be known as the Babylon Extension. At Flushing, the railroad had track rights with the Flushing and North Side Railroad to access Long Island City, where passengers could connect to the ferries along the East River to take them to Manhattan. In addition, Stewart had also built a branch line which would split from the main line at Garden City to Hempstead. But at the time, Stewart was developing the Garden City Station as one of the first planned suburban communities. The Central Railroad of Long Island would play an important role of transporting materials from Stewart's brickwork in Bethpage to his construction sites in Garden City, and later on allow Garden City residents to commute into Manhattan. In 1876, the Central Railroad of Long Island, in part with other competing railroads on Long Island, was absorbed by the Long Island Railroad and its president, Conrad Papahusen. Papahusen and his later successor, Austin Corbin, would merge into the Long Island Railroad system, the central between Flushing and the Nation Rifle Range in Queens. Later become the Creedmoor Rifle Range, and later, after that, the Creedmoor State Hospital, which was deemed redundant and abandoned about the railroad's merger in 1879. Although its tracks remained in place after World War I, the portion of track between Creedmoor and Floral Park was eventually dropped down to a secondary freight track, known as the Creedmoor branch, which for the most of the 20th century served Creedmoor State Hospital with daily coal deliveries. The portion of track between Floral Park and Babylon became the Central branch of Long Island. Also the area of where, in present time, where One World Recycling is for the New York and Atlantic, operated where the New York and Atlantic Railway goes for One World Recycling. A connection was made west of Floral Park, allowing the railroad to access the Long Island Railroad's main line, which would afford the branch and its connection from Long Island City to Jamaica. In 1900, the eastern portion of the Central branch was completely rebuilt and renamed to the Babylon Extension, so it would connect to the Long Island Railroad's main line, thus creating a connection between the main line to the Montauk branch. Meanwhile, the western portion of the Central between Floral Park and Hempstead saw much passenger use and would eventually become the present-day Hempstead branch in present day. The rest of the Central between Garden City and Bethpage saw much use during the early parts of the 20th century, but with the advent of automobiles in the 1910s, followed by the Great Depression, the 1930s saw this part of the line to decrease size in service. In the late 1920s, the Central's connection at Bethpage to the Babylon Extension was severed, ending all through onto the branch to Babylon. Therefore, the Long Island Railroad decided to rename the line to the Central Extension. The Babylon Extension and its connection to the main line would be renamed the Central Branch in present time. The only good spot for the line came when an Air Force base named Mitchell Field opened in World War I in the expensive area of the Hempstead Plains. The Central Extension saw much freight industry serving the base and several industries that sprang up around it. Nonetheless, in 1939, it was decided to get rid of the passenger service on the Central Extension because much of the tracks between Mitchell Field and Bethpage were torn up and used as scrap metal in World War II. A punishment came in the late 1940s when William Levitt began building Levittown in the Plainage area of Nassau County. Some of the tracks were relayed to provide the materials needed in the Levitt construction, and for a while, a small passenger shuttle was instituted by the Long Island Railroad, which provided passengers with service between Garden City and Plainage. The Long Island Railroad offered to completely rebuild the tracks, but to provide those living in the new community with rail service. But Levitt said with that because he didn't want a shuttle running in his new community. Gradually, the shuttle would cut back and rail and cut back and rail pushed up just to the east of Mitchell Field, which itself gradually began to cut their operations in the early 50s as the surrounding areas began their suburban development. The shuttle operation eventually came to an end in 1953 after the closing of Mitchell Field in 1961. In 1961, the Long Island Railroad continued to use the line, but not for passenger service. They used it for freight service and gave its present-day name of the Garden Mitchell Secondary. It was a large freight yard that still remained in Garden City, servicing local industries such as the Atlantic and Pacific Tea Company, the General Bronze Corporation, and Newsday. However, only a few passenger trains would service the line for the old Roosevelt Raceway. Many plans were about and were developed by the Long Island Railroad during the 50s and 60s to use the remaining part of the tracks to build a Nassau hub that would service the many new retail outfits that sprang up in the area, such as Roosevelt Field Mall, Nassau Coliseum, and Nassau Community College, which was built on part of the Mitchell Field site. However, the lack of resources at the time, the bankrupt Long Island Railroad was in the process of being bought by the MTA and the Pennsylvania Railroad, as well as the community opposition from residents in Garden City shelved those plans. In the 1980s through late 1991, the Long Island Railroad had several customers on the line or in the team yard who were switched once or more than a week. White Rose at the end of the spur that northeast out of the yard at Zachendorf Boulevard, a plastics customer at the end of the line, and Endo Boulevard at one of the entrances to the Nassau Community College, the waste ash from the town of Hempstead's burning waste material next to Meadowbrook State Parkway, and the offline customers who received boxcars, flat cars, and gondolas of various types of goods in the team yard by Stewart Avenue. As year after year went on, the remaining freight customers along the line also left as the Long Island Railroad and its resources on passenger service and became focused on its resources, and became the present-day Grand Central Madison, which connects Long Island Railroad customers to the east side of Manhattan. In May of 1997, the Long Island Railroad transferred freight operation to the New York and Atlantic Railway. The New York and Atlantic Railway currently doesn't have any freight customers online, but today the Long Island Railroad uses the Garden Mitchell Secondary for the MP15AC work trains to transport their work equipment to and from the Garden Mitchell Secondary. The Garden Mitchell Secondary was also used by the Ringling brothers Bryan M and Bailey Circus train, which used to use the Garden Mitchell Secondary to store their boxcars when it visited the Nassau Veterans Memorial Coliseum, located near the east end of the Garden Mitchell Secondary. But the Ringling brothers Bryan M and Bailey Circus didn't last that long. Unfortunately, it closed on May 21st, 2017. To this day, the line currently alternates between single and double track areas. The electrification goes on the Hempstead branch until the Garden Mitchell Secondary. One of the areas that are double tracked is at Clinton Road. Clinton Road used to be a stop for the Garden Mitchell Secondary until it closed and became a fire department stop. A number of sidings and team tracks remain to this day on the Garden Mitchell Secondary. Most of the line's grade crossings are unprotected, meaning they do not have gates or flashing lights. They just have a railroad crossing sign. That means that the train crew must step out of the train to signal the traffic to stop so the train can pass. The station at Clinton Road still has its low-level platforms, but is a fire department stop on the Garden Mitchell Secondary. I hope you guys enjoyed this history about the Garden Mitchell Secondary. I hope to get outside and explore along the route of it so I can make an actual history exploration video for you guys. If you liked learning about the history of the Garden Mitchell Secondary, hit that like button. If you loved learning about the history of the Garden Mitchell Secondary, hit that subscribe button so I can do more of these history videos. With that, thank you all for watching. Remember to subscribe for more channel content on FanRailerK. Stay safe out there and keep on rolling.